To our third webinar related to coronavirus and relief funds. This is the Non-ESSERF Idaho Rebounds Coronavirus Relief Fund webinar. And there we go. For a second, I thought I had technical difficulties. Let's start out with our strategic plan. As you may know, we're guided by three core principles. Number one is perseverance. All Idaho students persevere in life and are ready for college and careers. We're mutually responsible. All education stakeholders in Idaho are mutually responsible for accountability and student progress. And a very big piece of our strategic plan is the attraction and retainment of Idaho teachers and educators. So the purpose of this webinar is to share important information about the release of $1 million for the Non-ESSERF Idaho Rebounds Coronavirus Relief Funds. 53 LEAs have been identified for these funds. And because you're attending this webinar, you're one of them. These funds allocate a base amount of roughly $34,000 to LEAs who did not receive a Title I-A allocation in 2019-2020, and they also increase ESSER-funded LEAs who fall below this base amount. So some of you may have received an ESSER allocation, the big pot, out of the big pot of money, but because that allocation was below that base amount, you will receive additional funds through the Idaho Coronavirus Relief Fund to bring you up to that $34,367. A reminder, one of many reminders, these Idaho Rebound Coronavirus Relief Funds are separate from ESSER funding. The requirements are different, so please review the requirements closely, as certain expenses may not be eligible under these dollars. The funding requirements can be found on the GRA award letters. The letters were sent out last night. I pushed the allocations through, so you should have received a letter, an award letter in your email. But if you didn't, for some reason, it may have bounced back. It can also be downloaded through the GRA. Correct. The performance period for these non-ESSER funds runs from March 1st, 2020 through December 30th, 2020. And expenses must be incurred between those dates. There are three main principles. The expenditures necessary and was incurred due to the public health emergency. The expenditures not accounted for in your budget as of March 27th, 2020, and the expenditures incurred during that period, March 1st through December 30th. All three requirements must be met for an expenditure to qualify under this funding. So you may meet 2 out of the 3 criteria, and unfortunately, you would not be able to use those funds. To elaborate on the first point, all necessary expenditures incurred due to the public health emergency with respect to the coronavirus disease. So these funds must be used for action taken to address COVID-19, such as taking care of public health needs. The funds may not be used to fill shortfalls in government revenue. Also, the expenditure must be necessary. And that term necessary is broadly understood to mean that the expenditure is reasonably necessary for its intended use and based on reasonable judgment of the person who's spending the funds. The State Controller's Office provided us with a couple of examples that would be considered eligible COVID expenditures. So for example, communication enforcement of public health orders, purchase and distribution of medical protective supplies, cleaning and sanitizing of public areas and facilities, and other safety measures, including quarantining individuals. Payroll expenses for public safety, public health, healthcare, human services, and similar employees whose service are substantially dedicated to mitigating the emergency. Also, food delivery to vulnerable populations, expenses related to distance learning, telework capabilities for public employees, expenses for providing paid sick family medical leave to public employees, again, sanitizing and social distancing measures for public installations. The last example is a rather broad example because it just talks about related expenses reasonably necessary to ensure the function of government. The second criteria is that these expenditures were not accounted for in your most recent budget. So for example, if you had estimated $1,000 for general cleaning and sanitizing supplies, which are included in your approved budget, for these already budgeted expenditures, ESSER funds, non-ESSER funds cannot be used to cover that expenditure because you already had budgeted for it. So let's say you had done that at the beginning of the year in January, but in May, you ended up purchasing additional cleaning supplies to support increased cleaning and sanitizing. Those expenditures can now be reimbursed through the non-ESSER funds. Again, we talked about it a few times already. The expenditures were incurred to the period, during the period March 1st through December 30th. To recap, non-ESSER funds may be used for expenses related to the prevention of, preparation for, and responding to the coronavirus. All three requirements, as already mentioned, must be met for an expenditure to qualify under this funding. We will have supporting documentation. The screenshot on the left is a document that was provided to us by the State Controller's Office just a few days ago, and it gives you some more information about eligible expenditures and you know, the reporting requirements. The document on the left is also an FAQ that we have prepared in conjunction with the State Controller's Office to help with some of the questions that you may have. So these documents will be made available to you and posted on the website or emailed out to you in the near future.
Thank you, Alex. Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to cover the GRA process as far as requesting the dollars. If you were part of the technology training we had last week, this will sound pretty similar. There is one small change, and we'll discuss that later in the training. So there will be no changes to the current login process for users. So as long as you have your LEA set up in the GRA, and we're working on a few that are not, and you have the proper permissions, you should be able to go in there and request the dollars as you would with a typical claim. All functionality will remain the same, except for some additional reporting requirements. So on the request end, you're going to submit requests as you would with the traditional request. No functionality changes on that. The cost must be incurred between March 1st through December 30th, 2020. And the one additional piece of documentation we're requiring is an Excel spreadsheet that is labeled Idaho Rebounds Reimbursement Template. And this is used to support the drawdown request. And then we ask this to be attached to each request. You're going to report your expenditures and fund 271 through 289, and revenue will be reported in 445900. So on the documentation end, as far as backup documentations, as you incur costs, the SEO is not requiring us to collect those, but the LEA must retain those documents to support your drawdown request. And this is for future audits or anytime it's requested. So please retain those at your level, and there's no need to submit those onto us. However, if you are going to submit payroll expenses, the SEO is requiring us to have some sort of documentation on that piece. So whether it be a general ledger, some sort of summary statement, we're requiring those to be submitted with each request. And again, that's only for pay down requests. All other expenses that are incurred, please retain the documentation at your level. So the Excel file that is being required on all requests, we ask that you do not modify or alter the file. The SEO is requiring this file to be submitted with each claim, and what they will do is we'll upload that to transparency.idaho. So that's why they're requesting that this not be modified or changed to ease the burden of the upload process. Attach the Excel file to each request, and we have made a change to the requesting end, that we have added a link to the template. So as you start submitting claims, you'll see this new link right below your funding allocation, and it'll be on each request under these specific dollars. So you're more than welcome to save that file to your desktop for future reference, or you can download it each time you create a new request. So here's what the Excel file will look like. Columns C through K are required. There's some additional columns off to the right past K, and those aren't required. So just focus on C through K. The first thing you're going to do is select school district. There is a drop-down box in the big gray box under for type of organization. You'll see city, state, local government, and we have created a school districts. And then in column D, you should be able to find your LEA number and your district name. If you do not see it loaded in there, please let us know and we'll get that quickly added. And then column E through G are accounting data about the expenditure. We do realize, so this spreadsheet was set up under the statewide system, so our state accounting codes we use here. So we do realize that this may not match your accounting structure. So what we've been recommending people do is try to utilize the codes that best fit, and primarily look at the description, kind of look at the description level of what you're submitting to what is preloaded in the system, and matching it up the best you can. We do realize this may not match exactly to what the LEA has for accounting, but just try to fit the best in the parameters that are there. And in the second half of the spreadsheet, column H, it's just provide a brief description of items purchased. This is more going to be just a header, just kind of a title of what you purchased. Column A is where you're going to provide the detail of the expense. You're going to do a short justification on the use of the dollars and what you acquired. Column J, you'll enter the vendor name, and column K is just the amount. And then below is a link to the transparency.idaho website. If you like some additional information as far as greater detail on the fields, you're more than welcome to visit this site and read some additional detail. And then again, as you complete the Excel template, we ask that you request this or attach this to each request in the GRA. If you haven't done a GRA request, the Added Documents attachment button is at the very bottom of each request. If you submit a request and this document is not attached, we will send it back to you to add the file. And then kind of how the process is going to work is, with all federal dollars here at the state level, we're reimbursement based. So as we distribute funds out of the GRA, we'll go ahead and review those requests, approve them, and then what we do is we will submit the Excel file to the controller's office. They have a team set up to review the Excel file. They will review each request, and they have the final authority to approve them. If they can't come to a decision, they will forward those requests on to the CFAC committee, which is the Coronavirus Financial Advisory Committee. They will look into it in greater detail and then get back to us if that is a allowable expense.
So Aaron, and perhaps at that point in time, they could ask the district for more additional information.
Yep, and so our hope is not to have any expenses unallowed. So hopefully they'll come back and maybe it's just a clarification question or ask in greater detail. But there always is that risk that they come back and say the expense is unallowable. And at that time, we'll require the LEA to return those funds back to the department. Again, we hope to try to prevent this. So please provide as much information as you can on the front end. So as we submit these, we don't have to come back and get additional information. And then some more considerations with these dollars. There is a shorter performance period, higher allowability thresholds, and then the Excel template as far as the additional reporting requirements. And then I'm sure you've seen this slide again, just another reminder that we're starting to get several buckets of funding out there. We've got the ESSER funds, the technology funds, and now the non-ESSER funds. So as you submit requests, please look closely at what bucket of funding you're submitting at in the GRA. Some LEAs may not have all these funds available, but if you do have all these buckets of funds, please look at the reporting requirements and the allowability in each bucket to make sure that you're submitting it under the right one. And then if you do run into any challenges or issues along the way, please contact the GRA administrators for any GRA system issues, whether this be technology challenges or access issues. Please let us know and we can get that resolved quickly. And then any funding issues, please reach out to Lisa English or Alex and we'll get those answered and come back to you.
So here's our last slide with a couple of useful links, but now that I'm looking at it, I want to point out that we will have a dedicated coronavirus resource page under the federal programs web page. We're currently working on that. So hopefully sometime next week, that page is up and running and you will find all the webinars and supporting resource documents on that website. And then, of course, just a general slide with our department's contact information in case you would like to reach out to one of us in particular. Well, thank you so much for staying with us through another webinar. And Michelle, let's see if we have any questions.
We have one question. Can you repeat what funds number you want used for these funds again?
So that would be 271 through 289.
Another question we have is, if we have purchased a quantity of computing devices, does each device need a separate line on the spreadsheet?
No, you can just complete one line with the total dollar amount as you know, the expenditure, but then you can certainly in that field that refers to the more detailed description, you could put a comment there stating you purchased 200 Chromebooks at $200 a piece, totaling, you know, X amount of dollars, depending on, of course, what you purchase. So I think that's sufficient. I don't think you need to complete every single line, especially if you're making a large purchase.
Yeah, as long as they're similar items, if they're tablets, like Chromebooks and iPads, you can just do a summary line. And like Alex said, just puts the detail or the description, or the detail in the description field.
Another question that we have is, if expenses are eligible through December 31st, 2020, should schools wait till after that to apply?
No, please submit them as soon as possible. So as you start incurring costs, please submit the request for those dollars. And then just a reminder that the last day or last eligibility date is 12/30 on these funds. So the cost must be incurred no later than 12/30. There will be a liquidation period after this. So we have about 90 days to liquidate, for LEAs to liquidate any funds. But again, for processing and turnaround, please submit them as you incur costs.
Another question we have is, do we upload with each purchase, or do we do one spreadsheet at a later date?
You're welcome to batch them as you see fit. Ideally, we would, if you can batch them and do one request for all dollars, that would be preferred. But if it's going to be, if you have a time lapse in there, or that's not reasonable, you can submit them either way, I guess. So the preferred method is to batch them and submit them within a reasonable time. But if it's better for you to submit them one by one, you're welcome to do that too.
That's all the questions that we have. Oh, one more. Can this PowerPoint deck be emailed to the people on the call?
It sure can. So we'll get that information out to you. And as I mentioned earlier, it will also be posted on our upcoming coronavirus website. If there aren't any more questions, we'll end here. But of course, if you have any questions, you know, that may come to your mind in the meantime after you get off the training, feel free to email us and you know, just ask us your questions.
Okay, we do have a couple more questions.
Okay.
What was the last date to request reimbursement beyond December 30th?
So the last date for requests to be submitted, I don't have the exact date, but it's going to be 90 days after December 30th. Is how it's set up in the GRA right now.
So that would be the end of March.
Mm-hmm.
And was there a cap on the amount of funds per school?
So we will publish a list that shows the per LEA allocation. And that also should have been when you received your award letter last night. You should find that amount on that letter as well. But I guess let me just backtrack here for a second. We're talking about schools or LEAs?
The question has per school, and then it was clarified to LEAs.
Okay, so we established a base amount of $34,364. So if you did not receive any ESSER flow-through funds at the end of June, I believe, that's what we call a big pot of money, you would receive the $34,367, the full base amount. But if you did receive a smaller ESSER flow-through amount, let's say of $15,000, you would receive the difference between the $15,000 and the $34,000.
And that is all the questions that we have.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Michelle, for getting us the technical support. And as I said earlier, if there are any more questions, send us an email, let us know, give us a call, and start drawing down the funds. Thank you so much.